Well, hi guys, thank you for tuning into this session at Creation Fest. I'm so pleased to be joining you. My name is Sam Allberry, and our topic for this online seminar is finding hope in a world of disappointment. Finding hope in a world of disappointment. The Grand Canyon, the Masai Mara, and the Great Barrier Reef are all three things that you have to see before you die, at least according to a TV show a few years ago. In fact, it wasn't just three things you needed to see before you died, it was 50 things. The TV show gave you 50 things you had to go and visit before you left this earth. And that became a book, and that book became a whole kind of industry of things you've got to get done before you die. There was things to do before you die, which included getting a tattoo and milking a cow. There are 100 things to eat before you die, including a hot dog, which I'm guessing you've easily had, and crocodile, which may be harder to get your hands on. There are things to movies to see, there are albums to listen to, there are so many things apparently we need to cram in before we're done on this planet. And the fact that these things kind of are so popular tells us something very significant about ourselves. The fact is, we want to make sure we've got our money's worth out of this life. We want to make sure we've experienced the best of what's out there. This is very much a kind of first world problem. Most of us watching this don't have to worry about our next meal, but we do worry that we're missing out on the best things that this world has to offer. We look at our own lives and we feel a measure of disappointment. And these things apparently are getting worse. That sense of anxiety is getting more acute. One of the reasons is something called Instagram envy. You'll know Instagram, the social media platform for posting photographs and pictures. And the trouble with websites like that is people tend to post the pictures of the best things in their life, the really nice kind of looking meal, or the really sweet family moment, or the really beautiful scenery on a family vacation. We tend to hide the sort of normal stuff. But the net result of that is the accumulated effect of looking at the best parts of everybody else's lives means that everyone else's lives seem a lot better than our own. It looks like everyone else is just constantly having a blast, and we're kind of stuck in the humdrum and missing out on what everyone else is experiencing. Disappointment. We look at our own life and we feel disappointment. Maybe we've tried to kind of get away from that feeling. We've tried certain experiences. We've looked for certain solutions, but it's hard to get away from that feeling of disappointment. We have that fear that we're missing out, that things aren't what they should be. They're not what they could be. It is easy to be disappointed, and where do we look for hope? Every advert is trying to give us one answer to that question, one way of avoiding disappointment. If you wash with this shampoo, if you buy this car, if you do whatever it is, that will be the key to getting away from disappointment. The Bible gives us a different approach, because when the world around us shows us that life is often disappointing, actually the response of the Bible is to say, well, this life is not all there is. We are the only creatures, I think, that find life to be short. Lots of other animals live for longer or shorter periods of time than us. Fruit flies apparently only stick around for a couple of weeks. Some sharks can live for over a century. But we're the only creature who feel as though actually life seems too short. It's over before it's, should be. We have this unshakable sense that it's over too quickly, that there should have been more. Again, we have this unshakable sense of disappointment. Well, the Bible gives us some interesting hints as to where that hope might be found. Job, as you will know, was an Old Testament man who suffered enormously. And Job was sat there once in his misery, in his suffering, and as he was looking around him, he noticed a tree. And something about that tree made him think. Listen to what he says. This is Job 14, verse 7. Job says, "There is hope for a tree. If it be cut down, that it will sprout again, and that its shoots will not cease. Though its roots grow old in the earth, and its stump die in the soil, yet at the scent of water it will bud, and put out branches like a young plant. So as Job was looking around the natural world, he sees this tree and he thinks, trees get another chance. A tree can look completely dead, and yet, as he says, that there can be an opportunity for a seemingly dead tree to bud into new life. The tree has hope. And as Job reflects on that, he thinks about his own situation, he thinks about what it is to be a human being, and he thinks it doesn't seem right that a tree gets that second life, but for humans, death seems final. So Job continues, as waters fail from a lake, and a river wastes away and dries up, so a man lies down and rises not again. Till the heavens are no more, he will not awake or be roused out of his sleep. And it seems wrong to Job. As he looks around, it seems wrong that a tree gets another opportunity, but then humans just seem to die and then that's it. Nature seems full of promise of life beyond seeming death, and yet all we see for people is death being the end. Well, Job wrestled away with that, and what Job kind of was beginning to wonder about, the New Testament begins to show us in a lot more detail. So think about Paul in the New Testament. Paul writes about this body now being like a tent. Now, I'm not a fan of camping. I went camping once in my life. I'm assuming glamping doesn't count because it's not really camping. I went once. I went in Scotland, which is not a part of the world known for a climate conducive to sleeping outside. I'm skeptical of camping because any form of accommodation I can carry around on my back probably isn't going to be very good. And for me, a vacation is about living in a way that's more comfortable than normal life and not less comfortable than normal life. So I'm not into camping, and I don't think Paul is either. So listen to what Paul says here. He's talking about our bodies now being like tents. So this is what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. Paul says, "For we know that if the tent, which is our earthly home, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling, if indeed by putting it on we shall not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent, we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life." Now, Paul is no stranger to tents. We know that Paul's day job was making tents. He knew all about tents. But as he thinks about our bodies, he compares them to tents because of two things. Our bodies are vulnerable. They are prone to injury, to decay. Paul knew that. Paul himself had been kind of physically wrecked by the rigors of ministry, by the opposition he had encountered. He'd been beaten up and all kinds of awful things. So our bodies are vulnerable, but they're also temporary, like a tent. Tents are not established to be kind of long-term structures. Our bodies are not eternal. Nothing we do to our bodies can change that. I don't care how much kale you eat. Your body is not eternal. But Paul is saying that these bodies, though they are like vulnerable and temporary tents, these bodies are not all that we're going to have. He says, whereas life now is temporal, God has promised us a building, a tent for now, but a building to come. What he describes as a house not made with human hands, a house that is eternal. We will go from a tent to a building, from a life of groaning to a life that is eternal with God. So here's what Paul is trying to help us look and see. There is life to come beyond death. Job's instincts weren't wrong. There is life to come beyond death. And Paul is trying to say that life to come is going to be more solid than the life we experience now. It's going to be more real than the life we experience now. C.S. Lewis illustrated this amazingly in his short story, The Great Divorce. He gives an account of this guy getting to visit heaven. And as this guy kind of walks around, he's there and there's kind of grassy fields around him. As he walks on the grass of heaven, it begins to hurt his feet. And it's really painful, and he's wondering what's wrong, and that the angel who's kind of showing him around says, well, it's because the grass here is more real than your feet are. That's why it hurts. But the longer you spend here, the more real you will become as well. That's the kind of thing Paul is talking about. Our life to come is not some sort of vague, abstract echo of reality here. The present is the thing that is an echo of the reality that is to come. So there is hope. In a world of disappointment, there is hope. We're not wrong to want hope. We're not wrong to feel disappointment. We should need something more in this life, and that something more is going to come, and it will be more. So can our hope be any more detailed, any more firm than that? Well, yes. Because what the rest of the New Testament goes to show us is that life to come is going to be understood when we understand the resurrection of Jesus. His resurrection is the key, not just to being able to have that life to come, but understanding what that life to come is going to be like. So listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 3. Paul writes, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12," and Paul continues. So Paul is saying this is the stuff that matters the most, okay? There's lots of things you can kind of get into in your Christian life, lots of rabbit holes you can kind of dive down, but here's the thing that really matters. Paul says this is of first importance. This is where it's at. Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. Christ died. No one really denies that that happened. Paul wants us to know that Christ died for our sins. His death wasn't just because his life ended. His death was to do something for us, to achieve something. It was for our sins. It was to deal with the issue of our sin. And Paul says he died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. This is something that was always there in the Old Testament, that one would come whose death would finally deal with human evil and brokenness and guilt. But his death was not the end. Paul says Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. Just as physical as was his death is his resurrection. Jesus really did physically die. They really did put him in the ground. And Jesus really did get out of the ground and rise up again. And again, Paul says he was raised on the third day, again in accordance with the Scriptures. Even this resurrection on the third day was anticipated. It was there in the Old Testament, if only we'd had eyes to see. Jesus' resurrection wasn't just a kind of a metaphor. It wasn't just a kind of spiritual thing. It really was physical. And his physical resurrection points to our own. So later on in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, in verse 20, Paul writes this: "Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep." Okay, weird language, sleep, first fruits. What Paul is saying is that Jesus' resurrection was not isolated. It was not just a one-off, random, never to happen again event in history. No, Jesus' resurrection points to our own. It points to the resurrection of those who follow him. So Paul says Jesus has been raised from the dead as a kind of first fruits. Now, for those like me who know nothing about agriculture, let me tell you what first fruits means. The first fruits are the first batch of a crop to materialize. So you've got your field of whatever it is, and you begin to see the first fruits appearing. The first bit of the crop starts to show itself. So when you harvest that portion is the guarantee that the rest is on its way, that there's more to come. So when you see the first fruits, you're thinking, great, that means harvest is just around the corner. This stuff is kicking off right now. And Paul is saying that is what it is with Jesus' resurrection. Jesus' resurrection is the beginning of lots of other resurrections. It's the proof that there's more to come, that there's a whole field of resurrection that's going to be following him. His resurrection is like the starting gun for the resurrection of all who follow him. So his resurrection will be the first of many. Paul puts it this way in Romans chapter 8, verse 11. He says, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, and it does, he who raised Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his spirit who dwells in you. So if the spirit of God is in you, that is the spirit of the God who raised Jesus from the dead. The spirit of a resurrecting God is in you. And if a spirit of a resurrecting God is in you, you're going to get resurrected. It's mathematically that certain. So let's think about where we've come so far. We live in a world of disappointment. Something in us tells us there should be more than this. Nature seems to hint at that as well, as Job noticed. And the answer of the New Testament is there is more than this, and it's to come. There is a life to come that will be physical, that will be more real than the life we have now, and that Jesus' resurrection, if you like, is the guarantee of it. Well, that then begs the obvious question, what will it be like? What will this life to come be like? Is it the kind of life that is worth putting my hope in now? Because if it's more of the same, that's not really hope. That's just, okay, this is just going to be the way it is, and it's going to be the way it is for eternity as well. So what will this resurrection life be like? And again, the New Testament wants us to know it's not going to be the same as the life we experience now. It is going to be fundamentally transformed. It's going to be so much better. So in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 35, Paul asks the big question. How are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? That's the question we want to know. If we are going to have a physical life beyond death, what's that physical life going to be like? I mean, when you start to hear about resurrection, all these questions start coming up to the surface, don't they? When I stop and think about it, I start to ask questions like, what age am I going to be in the age to come? How old am I going to be when I'm resurrected? Am I going to be the age I was when I died? Is that going to be the case for everyone? Or are we all going to be the same age, irrespective of how old we were when we died? What level of technology will we have? Will we be operating at the level each of us was at when we died? Will there be all the technology that's been invented since we died? Am I going to be trying to, teach Moses how to use an iPhone? I mean, how's that going to work? What are we going to look like? Am I going to have all exactly the same features that I have now? Will any of them be improved? Will I have different color eyes? Will I have less grey in my hair? What's it going to look like? It's natural to wonder, isn't it? Yes, but Paul says it's natural to wonder, but it is foolish to worry about it. So let me give you the whole verse of what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 35. Paul writes this, "But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? with what kind of body do they come? You foolish person, what you sow does not come to life until it dies. It's not foolish to have the question. It's not foolish to be curious. It is foolish to worry about whether this physical resurrection life can happen because we can't get our heads around it. The presence of questions doesn't mean that this hope is foolish. So look at what Paul says, because this is going to help us live in this life now in a way that is hopeful. Paul says, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. I don't sow anything, so I don't even have a garden to kind of plant in. But I get the point Paul is making. Paul is saying every time you plant a seed, you're sticking it into the ground, you're burying it. It's like a mini funeral has taken place. Every time you plant a seed, you're kind of acting out a little mini funeral for that seed. It goes through a kind of symbolic death, and yet it comes to life because it's gone through that. In fact, the seed can only come to life if you put it in the ground first. If you keep the seed in the packet and just leave it on the kitchen table, you're not going to get a crop of anything. No, it has to go through this kind of symbolic death stage first in order for life to then emerge. And that is going to be the case with us. Our bodies will have to die so that they can be raised. We do need death in order to have resurrection. But Paul doesn't stop there. In the next verse, verse 37, Paul says, what you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or of some other grain. So think about this. If you're planting seeds, the seed you're planting looks nothing like the thing that it's going to grow into. Okay, so if you think about vegetables, I've got a bunch of different vegetable seeds to kind of think about this. Carrot seeds don't look carroty. Okay, they're not, small carrot-shaped things that look like mini carrots. The seed you plant doesn't look like the thing it's going to become. In fact, if you're like me and you just get a bunch of different seeds from different vegetables, looking at the seeds, you can't tell what it's going to grow into. If there wasn't a picture on the packet telling you that this was a pumpkin seed or a whatever else, you would have no idea. And so we mustn't be surprised if our physical life in the resurrection to come is going to be different to our life now. Because, again, we see all around us examples of you stick something in the ground and something amazingly better comes out of the ground, something out of all proportion to what you put in. Well, Paul continues. He's on a roll now. Verse 39 of 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, "Not all flesh is the same, but there is one kind for humans, another kind for animals, another for birds, and another for fish." Okay, we get that. We don't get cats and fish and birds confused because each have their own physical form. They have their own bodies. A cat is cat-like and a fish is fishy and so on. That there's a multiplicity of life in the natural world. All of it looks different. There are so many different kinds of bodies. And it's not just on earth either. Paul says there are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. He's not talking about heavenly bodies being like a supermodel. He's talking about stuff in the sky. You look at the different planets. There's that kind of body as well. In other words, God does not have any limit to his creative capacity. I don't know if you've had this experience of you discover a song you really like, so you get a hold of it, you look up the artist, you get hold of some of their other stuff, you listen to some of their other music, and you think, actually, it's kind of the same. Okay, when I had the song, really, that was all I needed, because all their other songs are basically that song, but slightly different. God isn't like that. God is not constrained in how much variety he can create. Every creature has the body it needs. Every heavenly body has its own unique glory, its own unique wonder. So we mustn't think that it's beyond God to create resurrection bodies. Just because we can't get our own heads around what a resurrection life could look like doesn't mean it can't happen. Because nature shows us God is really good at making stuff. God is really good at coming up with ideas for bodies. He knows what he's doing. So we don't need to be skeptical about our own resurrection body. Someone may mock us and laugh at us and say, oh, you really believe you're going to be resurrected? And Paul is like, well, actually, it's ridiculous to find the concept ridiculous. Because just nature itself shows us that you stick something in the ground and something amazing comes out of the ground. But he still hasn't told us what these bodies are going to be like. But we can assume that it's going to be a bit like Jesus' resurrection body. So in Philippians chapter 3 we read that Jesus will transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body. Our bodies now are lowly. We know that. Even at our best, our bodies are lowly. But they will become like Jesus' glorious resurrection body. His resurrection is the same type of resurrection that we're going to experience. Paul says again in 1 Corinthians 15, just as we have borne the image of the man of the dust, that's Adam, just as we're all kind of like Adam, the same kind of creatures as Adam, just as we have borne the image of the man of the dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. Just as we are like Adam, so too we will be like Jesus. So we can expect, therefore, looking at Jesus' resurrection body, we can expect a certain amount of continuity and a certain amount of difference. There was some continuity with Jesus' resurrection body. When Jesus was raised from the dead, he was still recognizably Jesus. He wasn't someone who was totally different. He still bore the scars of his crucifixion. He still broke bread with his friends in the way that he used to, that they could recognize again that this was the same man. But Jesus was also different. He seemed to have human capacities that he didn't have before he was raised from the dead. He seems to be able to pass through closed doors and appear and disappear at will. You can read about that in John 20 and 21. So we will be like ourselves now. We will be recognizably us, but we will also have capacities and capabilities that we presently lack. And Paul spells some of this out for us again in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 42 to 44. These are amazing verses. They show us what this resurrection life is actually going to be like. Paul says, what is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. What is sown in dishonor is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. So let's think about that. Paul is contrasting how we are now in our bodies with what we will be like in our bodies in the age to come. And again, this is the key to finding hope in a world of disappointment. So Paul makes this contrast. He says, our bodies now are perishable. And that is so painfully obvious to us. The more we try and maintain a really youthful appearance, the more pathetic it ends up looking, because reality always catches up in the end. We have bodies that are perishable, so we age, we decay, we go grey, we change. Our bodies are perishable, but the body to come will be imperishable. They will be eternal. There will be no wearing down and slowing down of our bodies then. He then talks about how our bodies now are sown in dishonor. Our bodies are marked by dishonor. Our bodies are marked by sin, by our own sin and by the sin of others. And we can't help that. We bear shame in our flesh from our sin and from the sin of other people. But the body to come, Paul says, will be raised in glory. It will not be tarnished by sin. It will just have a kind of radiance to it. Paul then says our bodies are sown in weakness. And again, we know that. We know that we are weak. I'm allergic to kittens. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? You get this tiny, cute, fluffy little thing, and you put it in the vicinity of me, and my eyes go puffy, and I start to my eyes will water, my sinuses go kind of berserk. It just takes a little cute kitten to shut me down. Our bodies are weak. I'm in my mid-40s now, and I can already feel the fact that there are things I find harder now than I found 20 years ago. I went hiking with a couple of friends who were in their early 20s recently, and I was thinking, okay, I'm not in my early 20s anymore. Breaking news, I can't do things as fast as I used to. That's the nature of this life. Our bodies are sown in weakness. But the body to come, Paul says, will be raised in power. We will have undiminishing power in the age to come. Paul says our bodies now are natural and will be raised spiritual. Natural means they fit with the nature of this present world. And the body to come will be spiritual, not meaning it won't be physical. Paul's already shown us it will be physical, but it'll be spiritual in that it will be so well fitted to the new creation that God is preparing. It will be the perfect vehicle to glorify God. It will be spiritual in that sense. It will be a really spiritual physical body. So Paul says this is what we have to look forward to. This is why the resurrection is so wonderful. Now, we might be tempted to think, well, a resurrection body would be great because maybe then I will finally have a flat stomach, or maybe then I won't have a bald patch, or whatever it is we might be dealing with. We think our resurrection is going to be great because of all the imperfections we see now in our appearance, and we think, well, if I can get rid of those imperfections, that will be amazing. But Paul is saying, actually, the real glory of our resurrection bodies isn't that they might conform to our present culture's view of beauty, but that these new bodies will be perfectly able to glorify Jesus. That is what's going to really make them amazing. That's what we really have to look forward to. Actually, that's what we most want when we stop and think about it. Which means if you are a Christian, your best physical days are ahead of you and not behind you. If you are watching this as someone kind of in your prime, your physical days to come are going to be so much better than how you are now in the age to come. And friends, this is the answer to our disappointment. We cannot make this world undisappointing. We can't. It's designed to disappoint us. It's supposed to disappoint us because we are not designed for this kind of world. We're not designed for a world where we sin and where we're sinned against. We're not designed for a world where we die and where life is full of so many frustrations. And knowing that we have a resurrection body to come, that we have life to come with Jesus, gives us hope now. It actually helps us to live with all of these disappointments because it means that these disappointments don't actually have to disappoint us anymore. I don't need to worry about squeezing every last drop of pleasure out of this life when I have an eternity in the new creation, in a perfect body to look forward to. I would love to see the Grand Canyon. I would love to see the Southern Alps of New Zealand. There's so many things I would love to see, but I don't need to get around all of these things in this life now, because there's a better life that is to come. Or I think of friends of mine who experience chronic suffering. I know a guy who's in his 60s who experiences a virtually near constant severe headache. He may have a few moments here and there of some relief, but basically every conscious moment he's awake, he has a really bad headache, and it's been like that for years, for decades. They'll try him out on some new treatment, some new medication. It may make a little bit of difference here and there, but he still just basically lives with a really thumping headache the whole time. And so I want him to know that actually this is not the only head he's going to have to deal with. He's going to have a whole resurrected head in the age to come that won't give him this kind of pain. Or I think of that wonderful Christian, Johnny Erickson Tada, a wonderful Christian lady in America who was paralyzed from the neck down and confined to a wheelchair since she was 17. She had, I think, a diving accident. She's now in her 70s, and she's said that the first thing she plans to do with her new resurrection body is to fall on her knees before Jesus. She will have working legs, and that is the first thing she wants to do with her working legs, is to kneel before Jesus. I don't know what pain you might experience, but the body you have now is not the only body you're ever going to have. And so we can live with even chronic, severe physical disappointments, because the best is yet to come. Let me finish by saying that one of my weirder hobbies, if I'm visiting a new place and I have some time to kill, is I'll go and look around an old churchyard. Maybe I'm in some town or village somewhere in England. I love looking at gravestones. It's just fascinating. A lot of them are crumbling and leaning, but some of them you can read what is written. Some of them are hundreds of years old. And there's one word that appears on gravestones of a certain age, and it's a Latin word, resurgam. In fact, if you're familiar with Jane Eyre, it turns up on someone's grave there. And resurgam translates as, I shall rise again. And evidently there was a particular time when it was a fashion to write that on your gravestone. And it's a message of defiant confidence that the grave may be our destination, but it's not our destiny. There is somewhere to go beyond the grave. There is risen life to come. In airplane terms, death is a transit lounge. It's where we wait between legs of a journey. It is not our final destination. And so each of us who know Jesus can say, I shall rise again. Death is no longer a threat in the way that it once was. It's been defeated in Jesus. There is a future that I can barely conceive of that is coming. George Herbert was a Christian poet of a previous century, and he once wrote, "Death used to be an executioner, but the gospel makes him just a gardener." The fact is, you don't bury a Christian, you plant a Christian, one day to rise again. So how do we find hope in a world of disappointment? Well, there are hints all around us that there should be more to life than what we experience. But ultimately we find hope by looking back to the resurrection of Jesus and then looking forward to our own resurrection. And it is only that will help us get over this fear of missing out in this age when we have everything waiting for us in the age to come. I really hope that encourages you. Thanks for watching.